There's something deeply powerful, maybe even life-changing, about the moment when someone finally decides they're done. Not in a careless or angry way, but in a calm, conscious and strong way. That kind of decision isn't about rage. It's not about revenge. It's about seeing clearly. Empathy is often misunderstood in our society. People often think it means being soft or always giving in to other people's emotions. And while empathy does mean you can feel and understand what someone else is going through, that doesn't mean it's weak. Actually, real empathy is one of the strongest qualities a person can have. Because it takes courage, self-control, and deep self-awareness. When we talk about empathy in relationships with narcissists, we're not just talking about being nice. We're talking about someone who feels things deeply. Someone who doesn't just hear what another person is saying, but actually understands what's going on beneath the surface. An empath doesn't just listen to words. They understand the real meaning behind them. They pick up on patterns, feelings, hidden. That's a kind of emotional insight that many confuse with weakness. But it's not weakness. It's awareness. It's emotional intelligence wrapped in kindness. Here's where it gets especially complicated. Narcissists aren't interested in real connection. They don't think about relationships in the same emotional way. Their world is all about control, attention, and protecting their ego. To a narcissist, an empath isn't seen as a full person. They are seen as a resource, a mirror, someone to reflect back praise and admiration. So when a narcissist meets an empath, it feels like a perfect match. On the surface, the narcissist craves attention, and the empath naturally wants to give support and care. But underneath that surface is a dangerous imbalance. Empathy without limits can lead to self-destruction. And that's the difference. An empath who hasn't learned their own strengths, who hasn't realized they have the right to say no, becomes an easy target for the narcissist. Their kindness gets turned against them. Their urge to help becomes a trap. They start questioning themselves. They start to believe the narcissist lies. You're too emotional. You're overthinking. You're making things up. This gaslighting eats away at the empath's sense of truth. So they try harder. They give more. They lose parts of themselves trying to keep the relationship together. But here's the truth that changes everything. Empathy only becomes powerful when it's aware. When it knows its own value, when it's not trying to earn love or fix someone who doesn't want to change, that's when empathy stops being passive and starts becoming strong. It becomes careful, wise, and thoughtful. And that's when it becomes a threat to the narcissist, because a self-aware empath starts to see through the tricks. They stop reacting emotionally to every little thing. They stop defending themselves constantly. They stop feeling guilty for things that were never their fault. And most of all, they stop trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. They learn that caring doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. That love without respect isn't love, it's slavery. And they start turning that same empathy inward toward their own healing. That's the moment when everything begins to shift, when empathy grows from caretaking to inner strength. And that shift scares a narcissist, because now the empath isn't predictable. They are no longer providing emotional comfort. They become calm, quiet, and detached. And in the narcissist world, that's a huge threat, because a narcissist can't control someone who's no longer emotionally hooked into them. At its strongest, empathy takes bravery. It means feeling everything but still staying true to yourself. It means seeing the truth and not looking away. It means caring deeply without losing your own limits. This kind of empathy is built through pain. It's earned by surviving heartbreak, It doesn't come from being naive. It comes from living through emotional abuse and coming out whole on the other side. Narcissists think and act in ways that most people don't fully understand. Deep down, they are not guided by reason or logic. They are driven by emotional manipulation. They build a world where they are always the center, always in control, always either the hero or the victim. And to keep up this fake world, they need people around them who reflect back the image they want. People who always agree with them, who always emotionally support them. That's where they get their power, not from truth, but from emotional control. And here's the thing, that control isn't about logic. You can't out-argue a narcissist, because their goal isn't to understand, it's to win. They twist facts, shift blame, and change the story just to keep their power. They don't listen to hear you, they listen to collect ammunition for later. So facts don't matter. You could be completely reasonable and still be ignored or twisted. Because what they're really afraid of isn't facts. It's you being emotionally strong and independent. That's why empaths are so important to narcissists. Empaths bring emotional depth, kindness, and a deep desire to understand. In a healthy relationship, that's a gift, but with a narcissist it becomes a trap. The narcissist picks up on that kindness fast. They test it. They see how much the empath will tolerate, how quickly they say sorry, how much they're willing to change, and once they know the empath will emotionally give in, they take full advantage. The empath is stuck in a loop of confusion. They're saying sorry for things they didn't do, they're defending themselves for feelings they never meant to show. They start to question their own memories and trust their instincts less and less. And that's not an accident. That's the narcissist's plan. The more unsure and emotionally unstable the empath becomes, the more power the narcissist has. It's never been about winning a logical debate. It's about keeping the empath confused and emotionally hooked. That's how they stay in control, not through open fighting, but through quiet chaos. Just enough stress to keep the empath anxious, trying harder, giving more. And the more the empath gives, the more the narcissist takes. They gaslight, project, shift blame, and the empath, still trying to understand, keeps explaining, keeps soothing, keeps hoping. But the narcissist doesn't want understanding. They want control dressed up as conversation. Many empaths are smart, thoughtful, even very self-aware. But intelligence doesn't protect you from emotional traps. Because the trap isn't set with logic, it's set with emotional tricks. The narcissist trains the empath to link peace with obedience, love with self-sacrifice, and closeness with chaos. The empath becomes afraid of triggering the narcissist. They start changing their words, tone, and actions just to avoid conflict. And while doing that, they lose their sense of self. The narcissist wins. Not by being right, but by making the empath question if they're even allowed to feel what they feel. That emotional dependence is the real power the narcissist holds. It's why they can stay in control even when their lies are obvious. They don't need to be right. They just need the empath to feel wrong. They don't need to be honest. They just need the empath to feel ashamed. Once the empath becomes the emotional caretaker in a one-sided relationship, the narcissist has all they need. Because it's not about truth, it's about emotional control, using guilt, fear, and false hope. The only real way to break this cycle isn't through long talks or proof or confrontation, it's through letting go emotionally. Because when the empath stops needing to prove their side, stops needing to please the narcissist, all those old tricks stop working. That's when the whole game falls apart. The narcissist can't function in an emotionally calm space. They can't control someone who doesn't react. They can't dominate someone who doesn't absorb their chaos. Those who have lived their lives putting the emotions and needs of others first often find the idea of setting boundaries confusing or uncomfortable. For someone who feels deeply, an empath, creating boundaries might at first seem like going against their very nature, kindness, openness, and a desire to connect. But boundaries are not barriers meant to shut others out. They are the markers that show where one person ends and another begins. For empaths, learning how to draw those lines is the start of stepping into their true strength. In relationships with narcissistic people, boundaries are usually the first thing to be questioned, pushed aside, or ignored completely. Narcissists tend to feel entitled. They believe they deserve constant attention, praise, approval, and control over how they are seen by others. When an empath gets involved, they are usually met with charm, warmth, and what looks like emotional closeness. The narcissist quickly notices how the empath naturally cares, listens deeply, and avoids confrontation. These traits are then used against the empath to slowly break down their sense of space and identity. The breakdown of boundaries in such a relationship often happens in quiet, hidden ways. It doesn't start with obvious cruelty. It starts with tiny compromises, overlooking a warning sign, brushing off a hurtful remark, allowing minor disrespect because they're just stressed today. The empath explains these things away because they believe in second chances, in healing, in understanding someone's pain. But each small exception becomes a step away from their own center. Before long, the empath is excusing more serious behavior, putting the narcissist's needs first, and ignoring their own pain in order to avoid conflict. What makes this so damaging is that it often looks like love. The narcissist presents the empath limits as selfishness, their boundaries as harsh, their independence as disloyalty. They make the empath feel guilty for speaking up. They twist boundaries into rejection. This emotional confusion traps the empath in a loop of doubt and overgiving. The more they try to return to themselves, the more pushback they get. Eventually, it starts to feel easier to just give in, rather than keep fighting to be understood. But a turning point comes when the empath can no longer ignore the cost of that surrender, when the constant exhaustion becomes too heavy, when they finally notice how much of themselves they've lost. Something shifts. They begin to question not only the narcissist, but the relationship as a whole. They start asking new, powerful questions. What do I truly need? How do I really feel? What am I no longer willing to accept? These questions are the first bricks in the foundation of a new kind of strength, one built on self-respect. Establishing boundaries isn't about punishing the narcissist. It's a bold statement of personal value. It's the moment when the empath stops measuring their worth by how much they can give and begins to see their worth in simply being. A boundary isn't about forcing someone to change. It's about deciding what you will no longer allow in your own world. It's not about control. It's about having a clear picture of what supports your peace, your energy, and your well-being. When an empath starts to put up healthy boundaries, the narcissist often doesn't take it well. They might respond with anger, confusion, or manipulation. They are not used to being told no. That word threatens their sense of control and breaks the pattern of always getting their way. It upsets the emotional setup they've created, where the empath keeps giving and they keep taking. A boundary points out this unfairness. It forces the narcissist to notice something they often avoid, that other people are separate, whole, and independent. This realization is deeply uncomfortable for the narcissist, and they might ramp up their behavior to try to get back control. They might guilt the empath, play the victim, or suddenly shower them with affection in an effort to restore the old dynamic. But when an empath has felt the strength of their own boundaries, something inside changes permanently. They begin to recognize the pattern. They learn to believe their inner signals more than the narcissist's words. They stop feeling like they must manage someone else's emotions. Most important, they understand that they have the right to exist, to have needs, and to say no without having to explain or feel bad. Boundaries aren't just rules, they are statements of who someone is. For an empath, they represent a major shift, from needing outside approval to living in alignment with their inner truth. They signal the move from emotional caretaking to emotional freedom. At first, boundaries might bring tension or conflict, but in the long run, they bring peace and clarity. The idea of detachment is often misunderstood, especially by people who've learned to equate love with self-sacrifice, attention with caring, and being present with duty. For empaths, detachment can feel cold or harsh. They're used to being emotionally open, always there for others, and deeply connected to how others feel. But in a relationship with a narcissist, this constant emotional presence becomes a danger rather than a strength. With a narcissist, every feeling the empath shares becomes a tool for control. Every moment of vulnerability is used to gain more power. The more emotionally involved the empath is, the more power the narcissist holds. Narcissists work best in emotional chaos. They use confusion, mood swings, and drama to stay in charge. These ups and downs keep the empath constantly trying to fix, calm, or understand. They pull the empath into a mental game with no clear rules and constantly changing goals. What traps the empath isn't logic, it's how much they care. The more they try to explain themselves or seek understanding, the deeper they get pulled in. Meanwhile, the narcissist feeds off the attention, the apologies, the desperate need for resolution. That's why detachment becomes such a powerful and necessary act. It's not about stopping care, it's about choosing not to keep playing a rigged game. Detachment is saying no to manipulation, no to fake drama, and no to being drawn into endless cycles of hurt. It's the moment the empath stops reacting, stops arguing, and stops trying to justify themselves. That stillness and quiet completely disarms the narcissist's usual approach. Where there was once emotional reaction, now there is calm. Where there was once effort to fix, now there is silence. The narcissist isn't getting the emotional energy they rely on. They might try harder, get angry, or even pretend to be kind again. But true detachment, once embraced, is hard to reverse. The empath no longer feels the need to win an argument or explain a feeling. They've learned there is nothing left to prove. The cycle only continues if they agree to stay in it. With space, the empath starts to see clearly. The narcissist's behaviors begin to repeat in obvious patterns. The emotional roller coaster loses its effect. The charm starts to seem fake. And most importantly, the empath realizes that they no longer need to figure the narcissist out. They understand now that it's not their job to fix or carry someone else's dysfunction. This clarity is freeing. It allows the empath to take their emotional energy back and use it for their own growth. They begin setting new boundaries, picking up old interests, and tuning into their own inner wisdom. Detachment creates the room for reflection, truth, and inner peace. In that calm space, the empath starts to feel a quiet kind of freedom they may never have felt before. The narcissist becomes unsettled. They're no longer at the center. They no longer control the empath's emotions. They may lash out, beg, or try to charm their way back. But now the empath sees it for what it is. They don't feel the same urge to fix things, to carry the burden, or to engage. Their sense of self isn't tied to whether the narcissist accepts or rejects them. Detachment doesn't mean not caring, it means caring without losing yourself. It means knowing you can have compassion without becoming emotionally stuck. It's the realization that real love should never ask you to give up who you are. For the empath, detachment is a return to owning their own feelings and choices. It's a journey out of the narcissist's control and back into their own light. Healing isn't only about letting go. It's about calling back all the pieces of yourself that were lost while trying to love someone who couldn't or wouldn't love you in a healthy way. For the empath who's endured this kind of relationship, healing becomes an act of courage and truth. It's about slowly undoing all the lies that were taught through emotional harm and manipulation. It's a slow and painful journey of remembering who you were before your sense of self became shaped around someone else's dysfunction. Narcissists control in more ways than just the obvious. It's not only about directly telling someone what to do, it's also about subtle, quiet control that slowly eats away at self-trust and independence. They twist reality with gaslighting, shift blame through projection, and disguise the cruelty as if it's your fault. Little by little, the empath absorbs these false stories. They start to doubt their own thoughts, question their memories, and bury their emotions. They change themselves just to get through it, often losing the ability to tell the difference between love and duty, kindness and obedience, caring and codependency. But once the empath steps away from the relationship, either physically or emotionally, healing begins, and slowly things that were hidden in plain view start to become obvious. Patterns that once felt confusing now begin to make sense. The repeated cycles of mistreatment that were once accepted now seem deeply disturbing. That never-ending emotional exhaustion, the constant alertness and the lingering guilt, it all begins to come together. The empath starts to understand that the real issue was never their love. It was the absence of mutual respect and genuine care. They realize that giving so much of themselves in a one-sided connection isn't brave, it's harmful. Healing takes the narcissist's psychological control away because it shows complete withdrawal from the emotional game they were always playing. Narcissists feed off attention, reactions, and the power to affect how others feel and act. But once the empath starts healing, they no longer provide that energy. They don't reply to late-night texts anymore. They stop trying to explain themselves or chasing closure from someone who never gave it in the first place. They stop needing the narcissist to confirm their truth or admit the harm they caused. This change is a major blow to the narcissist because it breaks their illusion of power. They can't reach into the empath's heart and stir up confusion anymore. The empath is no longer an easy target for guilt, manipulation, or emotional traps. And since narcissists almost never take a hard look at themselves, they often see this shift not as healing but as punishment or betrayal, when really it's about survival. The empath isn't pretending or playing games, they're truly gone emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. As they grow, they begin to rediscover who they were before the harm. They listen to themselves again. They learn to say no without feeling bad. They reclaim their happiness, their time alone, their courage, and their personal limits. They start to build new relationships that are grounded in respect and emotional safety. Life becomes less about getting through the day and more about really living. The emotional scars may still exist, but they stop defining who the empath is. Instead of feeling like evidence of failure, they become reminders of strength. The empath also starts to understand that healing isn't a straight path. Some days are filled with clarity, other days bring back pain and sadness. There are moments when the past feels too heavy and others when freedom feels exciting and peaceful. But every step, no matter how small, moves them closer to being whole again. And with every step forward, the narcissist's grip weakens. The loud voice that once echoed in their mind loses its volume. Their opinions no longer shape the empath's self-image. Their approval stops feeling necessary. With healing comes new awareness. The empath becomes more skilled at spotting warning signs. They begin to trust their gut feelings again. They learn to walk away from relationships that seem too familiar in harmful ways. They no longer mistake turmoil for love or control for chaos. They start choosing calm over chaos, honesty over confusion, and self-respect over short-lived attention. This kind of growth can't be undone. Once the empath knows the truth, they can't pretend they don't. Once they feel the strength that comes from trusting themselves, they can't go back to abandoning who they are. The narcissist, who once had so much influence, becomes just another person, no longer able to control the empath's thoughts or feelings. Healing turns the empath from someone who gave and gave into someone who owns their life again. They reclaim their independence, their voice, and their sense of direction. There comes a moment in every empath's journey when silence says more than words ever could. When the choice to not respond becomes the loudest message of all. That quiet decision to leave, not with one last argument or tearful goodbye, but simply walking away, is the beginning of true freedom. To the narcissist, this silence is confusing. They are used to drama, arguments, and emotional exits that leave open doors for return. They expect the empath to cry, to plead, to explain themselves again and again. But when the empath reaches their limit, there's no show, no grand finale. Just a quiet walk away that carries more power than any outburst ever could. Narcissists operate in patterns, and those patterns follow a script. Idealize, devalue, discard, then try to pull you back in. It's not random, it's a cycle. Each phase is designed to keep the empath hooked, clinging to hope that things will finally improve. The narcissist knows how to feed that hope, offering just enough warmth to keep the empath holding on. But when the empath finally sees the pattern, when they stop hoping, stop trying, and stop explaining, they break the cycle. And that terrifies the narcissist more than anything. Walking away isn't just about physical space. It's about creating distance mentally and emotionally. It's letting go of the need for answers, the urge to study the narcissist's every move or to fix what was never theirs to fix. It's not bitterness, it's clarity. The empath accepts that nothing will ever change. No sorry will be real, no reason will ever make the harm make sense. They stop expecting anything from someone who never gave anything real in the first place. And in doing so, they find peace. This kind of exit feels different. Narcissists like to leave things unfinished. They want the door cracked so they can sneak back in. They like to know they still have a hold. But when the empath leaves completely, without drama, without emotion, it sends a message that can't be twisted. I see you, I understand, and I'm done. There's no argument left to have, no feelings left to use as tools. The narcissist who once controlled so much now stands in silence, powerless. The strength in that moment isn't about revenge, it's about recovery. The empath no longer leaves out of pain, but out of peace. They know their worth now. They no longer feel the need to prove the mistreatment. They no longer wait for acknowledgement. They understand that the narcissist's inability to love wasn't about them. It was the narcissist's own shortcoming. And once that truth is lived fully, there's nothing left to say. That silence isn't hollow. It's full of strength. Every step taken away from the narcissist is a step into freedom. And even when the narcissist tries to pull them back, using memories, guilt, or false loyalty, none of it lands. The empath sees the games. The guilt trips don't work anymore. The charm isn't charming. The manipulation that once confused them now just looks sad and desperate. What once seemed like love is now clearly exposed as control. The narcissist may try to create stories, play the victim, or convince others to doubt the empath's character. But even that doesn't work. Not when the empath chooses not to respond. Not when they don't defend or explain. They choose peace over how others might see them. They understand that no explanation will ever satisfy the narcissist's hunger for power. And by not taking part in the performance, they bring it to an end. No drama, no curtain call, just quiet strength. The kind that comes from knowing your own value. To outsiders, this ending might look sudden, but to the empath, it's been building for a long time. It's the result of too many broken promises, too many ignored feelings, too many second chances. It's the end of years of self-doubt and quiet suffering. When that last boundary is crossed, the decision is already made. There's no anger left, only certainty. That kind of silence shakes the narcissist. It shows a kind of strength they can't understand. A power that doesn't scream or chase or explain, it simply leaves and never comes back. In that quiet exit, the empath is reborn. No longer the one who tolerated, explained, or endured. They become someone new, whole, free, and finally aware that leaving isn't weakness. It's the greatest act of strength they've ever known.